Okay, so this is a bit of an educational clip here to share what foods are actually made of, because this helps us to balance our meals. So there's a rhyme and reason to why I'm sharing what I'm sharing here. So essentially all foods are made up of either fats, proteins, or carbohydrates. That's that pie chart sitting here in the center. So you've got either fats, proteins, or carbs. Pretty much 99.9% of foods fall into one of these three categories. Some of them may have a bit of an overlap between two categories, but predominantly you'll find they'll be made out of one of the three. So let's have a look at fats. Fats are predominantly things like that are listed here on these dot points. So you've got butter and margarine, including dairy-free spreads. That's all fats. Oils, we're familiar with oils being part of fats. So that's olive oil, macadamia oil, peanut oil, whatever it is all you're using is oil. That's all part of fats. Then you got your fats for animal sources, skin off the chicken, the visible fats on meat cuts, duck fat, ghee, salmon skin. And then you got full fat dairy and full fat dairy products. They're all fatty fats and belonging to that fat group. Then you got nuts and nut butters and seeds and seed butters. They're all belonging to the group of fats because they're predominantly fatty in their constitution. And you also have avocados, which are really rich in fats. All right, so that covers our fats, so you know what fats are. Next, we've got proteins. So proteins are pretty much all your meats, your poultry, your fish, your seafood, all that kind of stuff. So what we have is beef, lamb, kangaroo, pork, venison, etc. You've got chicken, turkey, duck, and other poultry, fish and seafoods, eggs, tofu, and tempeh, and then some cottage cheeses, or some cheeses like cottage cheese, for instance, because they're quite high in protein. Doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to eat all the foods that are in here or that you're going to eat all these foods, but it's great to have an understanding of what falls into the protein category and what is actually a fat. Now, all the other foods that we have pretty much that we know of fall in the carbohydrate category. So the largest category of foods we have is actually carbs. So sometimes when people talk about going on a low carb diet, it doesn't mean you're actually cutting out carbs. It's virtually impossible to cut out carbs in your diet. You would just literally, it's not possible. So, but what it does mean is if you're cutting out certain carbs, then these particular carbs might be the starchy carbs or things like your grains or grain products. Those are also types of carbs. So let's have a look at what it means to be eating carbohydrates. So carbohydrates include all your grains, whether that's grains or grain products. So grains are the whole grains like rice, wheat, spelt, rye, and grain products, so anything that's made out of the grain itself, which has been milled into a flour. So that's your bread, bread rolls, pizza, pasta, cereals, pastries, cakes, and all that kind of really yummy stuff. Okay, we've also got in the category carbs all your sugars, all your sweeteners, including honey, maple syrup, agave nectar, rice malt syrup, blackstrap molasses, and so many other sweeteners that are around. So they're all sugars and sweeteners. So essentially they're also carbs. Now, surprise, surprise, we've got pulses, lentils, and beans. So that's all your chickpeas, Bertolli beans, black beans, etc. They're all considered carbs as well. Some people think that they're proteins, but they're actually only about 10% of that food is representative protein. So being only 10%, we can't really, 90% of that food is actually a carb. So that's why we've put them into the carbohydrate component here in the pie chart. And then you've got all your fruit and all your vegetables. They're carbohydrates. They're predominantly carbs. And then you've got your low-fat dairy, milk, yogurts, and all those. And they're all carbohydrates predominantly as well. So you can see that, pretty much all foods can be categorized into fats, proteins, or carbohydrates. Now, this is important to understand because if you want to start balancing foods, which is what we can look at next, then it's good to know what you're actually balancing because you want to have the right proportion of fats, proteins, and carbohydrates when you eat, because your body responds best to a good package like that. And obviously you need to know what kind of carbohydrates are actually better for you and which ones are less supportive for your body. Cool. So I hope that's giving you a little bit of insight into what foods are made up of. As a side question, most people often ask me, what about things like vinegar or alcohol? Alcohol has a lot of sugar, so a large component of that is carbohydrate, but some foods like salt and vinegar don't actually fall into this category of the pie chart. They're a bit separate foods, and I actually don't even call them as foods because they're not really necessarily ones that feed the body. Yeah, they don't actually give nutrients and nutrition to the body. So that's why I'm just focusing here on the predominant foods that are important for us to understand in terms of what we eat to nourish the body.